Students, today we are going to discuss the poem Birches, written by famous American poet Robert Frost. Birches is one of Robert Frost's most popular poems. And the main image of the poem is of a series of birch trees that have been bowed down so that they no longer stand up straight, but rather are arched over. While the poet quickly establishes that he knows the real reason that this has happened, ice storms have weighed down the branches of the birch trees, causing them to bend over. He prefers instead to imagine that something else entirely has happened. Perhaps a young boy has climbed to the top of the trees and pulled them down, riding the trees as they droop down and then spring back up over and over again until they become arched over. This tension between what has actually happened and what the poet would like to have happened between the real world and the world of the imagination runs throughout Frost's poetry and gives the poem philosophical dimension and meaning far greater than that of a simple meditation on birch trees. So, let's first read the poem, the first 10 lines of the poem. Actually, this poem is of 59 lines without any stanza breaks. Although it contains several sections that move from naturalistic description to a fanciful explanation of why the birches are bowed, and it concludes with philosophical exploration of a person's existence in the world. So, I'm just going to read out the first 10 lines. When I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay, as ice storms do. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored as the stir cracks and crazes their enamel. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells. So we see that the lyric begins in a tone of easy conversation. When the poet sees birches bending to right and left across the lines of straighter, darker trees, he imagines that some boy has been swinging them. But soon the truth dawns upon him and he realizes that swinging cannot bend them down permanently. The first break in the poem occurs in line 5. As ice storms do, often you must have seen them. Frost admits that it is ice storms and not boys who bend down the birch trees. Then the next few lines are a beautiful description of birch trees, their branches frozen and encrusted with ice in the morning after an ice storm. However, their beauty is only short-lived. Then soon in line 9, as the stir cracks and crazes their enamel, means the sun cracks and crazes their enamel and the ice breaks and falls on the snow. As the stir cracks and crazes their enamel, soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells. So, in this way, there is a break here and a turn. Then Now first let's read the next 10 lines. Shattering and avalanching on the snow crust, such heaps of broken glass to sweep away, you'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break, though once they are bowed, so low for long. They never right themselves. You may see their trunks arching in the woods years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground, like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. Frost makes another break. He says that when he raises the symbolic level of the poem with the sentence, we see, you'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. So he's using shattering and avalanching on the snow crust, such heaps of broken glass to sweep away. You'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. He's using a metaphor here. This line not only anticipates the last line of the poem, but it also signals the beginning of a retreat from reality. The language of the poem becomes more poetical here for the first time. Frost uses a simile comparing the bowed birch trees to girls on all fours, their hair hanging down in front of them. More than just destruction, the imagery now turns to symbols of conquest. The birches are bowed so that they can never right themselves. And the image of the girl is also the image of a captive kneeling before her captor. This becomes an important theme in later parts of the poem. So he uses metaphors and similes here. And now in the next 8 lines which I am going to discuss with you today, let's read them first. But I was going to say, when truth broke in with all her matter of fact about the ice storm, I should prefer to have some boy band them. As he went out and in to fetch the cows, some boy too far from town to learn baseball, whose only play was what he found himself, summer or winter, and could play alone. So now here, the second significant break. The first was already we have discussed, it was in line 5. And now here, Frost dismisses the ice storm as a cause of the birches' condition in favor of his original explanation that a boy had bent them, despite the fact that he knows that a boy didn't do it. But I was going to say, when truth broke in with all her matter of fact about the ice storm, I should prefer to have some boy band them. The word prefer here is very important. Frost rejects the narrow limitations of the outside world in favor of his own poetic vision. However, this world must necessarily have its own limits, for it inhabits only his own mind. Likewise, the boy is separated from other people and plays alone. So, the true reason, the hard fact for the permanent bending of birches, after realizing this thing, knowing the truth, the poet again returns to his fancy, to his imagination, that the birches have been thus bowed down permanently by some boys swinging them. He prefers it. He imagines that some boy who lives too far from the town to learn baseball devises a game for himself, a game which he can play alone, whether it's summer or winter. He takes to birch swinging as a pleasant sport. He climbs the birches over and over again, so much so that not a single tree remains unconquered and unbent. So, students, today we have discussed the first 28 lines of this poem, and tomorrow we'll continue with the next part of the poems. The remaining lines we'll discuss, and till then, thank you. See you tomorrow.